In this household, we believe in Melissa Barrera.
What's up?
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel, I like to talk about entertainment media. The folks over at Vertical were kind enough to grant me access to an early press screener of their new film, Your Monster, and now that it's the week of release, it's time to talk about all of it. As I usually do for opening weekend film reviews, I will begin with a spoiler-free section, and then we are going to get into some very heavy spoilers. The sections are timestamped, so proceed as far as you prefer into spoilers. Without elaborating though, I will say that regardless of what you think this film is, if you haven't seen it but are interested in doing so, I would recommend that you watch without knowing detailed spoilers ahead of that first watch. If you think you know what Your Monster is, think again. The way that it's been marketed, if you're just watching a trailer, you really have no idea what's coming. Having said that though, if there's one reason to watch this, it's Melissa Barrera. This is a star vehicle for her multitude of talents and her range as a performer. She's singing, she's being romantic, vulnerable, funny, angry. She is digging into the deepest corners of this character and bringing us with her. Let's introduce the premise of Your Monster. Melissa Barrera stars as Laura Franco, an actress in New York City who survived a traumatic cancer diagnosis and surgical treatment. However, the trauma not only comes from being sick, but the fact that her boyfriend Jacob broke up with her during that period of treatment. Following this, she returns home where she meets a terrifying, albeit charming monster living in her closet. Now, the film has been billed as a romantic comedy or a horror romantic comedy, so naturally, as a Lisa Frankenstein truther, I was looking forward to Your Monster thinking I was going to get something similar to that, albeit in a slightly different flavor. Your Monster is absolutely nothing like Lisa Frankenstein. Perhaps it's hyperbolic to say that there are no similarities, but the things that I like about Lisa Frankenstein and the things that I like about Your Monster have far less overlap than I would have expected. I also wouldn't classify Your Monster as a romantic comedy. I do enjoy the film. I logged it at 4 stars, but give me a bit of room to explain why Your Monster is operating in its own lane. Your Monster doesn't feel like a romantic comedy, but more so a character exploration of Laura Franco. Monster has his own role to play in the story, but the film is first and foremost Laura's story. It's far less of that archetype of a girl meets boy and they fall in love and we put the film on for that warm and fuzzy catharsis of romantic love. Your Monster is about mining the layers of Laura, of how deeply she's been harmed by the traumas introduced in the beginning of the story, and if you want to do a more academic reading of this film's narrative, you could probably make the argument that there is also a deeper commentary about the ways that women are made to feel obligated to make themselves smaller, to always be kind and accommodating, in a way that their male counterparts are not pressured to do. All of those layers and nuances take priority over a traditional love story that rom-com fans might be tuning in to see. This doesn't mean that the film is better or worse than that classic rom-com archetype, but I simply bring this up because viewer expectations can and do play a major role in how viewers experience and rate a fictional story. If you go into Your Monster wanting to see a classic love story between girl and boy, or I suppose girl and monster, that's just not what this film is going to be. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's very clear that the film's voice and creative perspective is referential to classic musicals and love stories. One of the first songs you hear in the film is Dick Van Dyke's Put on a Happy Face from Bye Bye Birdie. You see a glimpse of the Fred Astaire film Royal Wedding. There is romance in the film, a love of romance itself, a love of romantic stories, but I still wouldn't first and foremost classify Your Monster as a romantic comedy. Now, it's still a good film though. I believe this is Caroline Lindy's directorial debut for a feature film as opposed to short films, and aesthetically it would seem as though this film is working on more of an indie budget, but what they lack in some of the more grandiose visual elements that you'd gain from things like very expensive lights, cameras, cranes, and things of that nature, they make up for by keeping the focus dialed in on these actors. In many ways, Your Monster feels like a hybrid of the film medium and theater. There are multiple instances of these long, uninterrupted takes between two actors in a conversation, whether they are walking down a street or standing together in a park, you can see how deeply committed all of these performers are to the emotional truths of their characters. There is no denying that a lot of the viewers and film fans who are pushing for Your Monster to succeed are fans of Melissa Barrera for both her talents as a performer, but also her principles as a human being. I've seen some professional coverage that seems to tiptoe around things, but I'll just say it outright. There have been multiple attempts to defame and professionally sabotage Melissa because she openly supports Palestine. By the way, if you are new to my channel, I do have donation links in my description box for that. They are included in every video that I upload on here. So it's not unreasonable for me to guess that a lot of people who are interested in seeing Your Monster want to do so to support her specifically. And if she's your reason for wanting to see this film, she absolutely makes it worth your time. Now, I haven't seen all of her films, but I have seen a few. In the Heights, Scream 5 and 6, and Abigail. Melissa was good in all of those, but what she does in Your Monster completely outdoes all of those films. The material covers so much more, and the journey Laura goes on is so transformative and incredible to watch. I do want to give some flowers to some of the people in the cast who support her. Tommy Dewey plays Monster, and he is so incredibly funny in this. I love his line delivery, and I was thoroughly entertained anytime he was on screen.
Look! From this angle, I can see your back and your face simultaneously. That's how much I'm looking at you.
I'm a mess!
No, you're not!
I'm a disaster!
Oh.
He has so much on, and yet I could fully see who this character is through all the fur and facial prosthetics. Additionally, Edmund Donovan plays Jacob, Laura's ex-boyfriend, and I absolutely despised this character, and that is really a credit to Edmund as a performer because it is so clear that he knows exactly who he's playing. Even though it's not his story, you only ever see him as he relates to Laura, but I could understand every detail of who this person is. He is so selfish and narcissistic. All I wanted was for the movie to give him exactly what he deserves. And I know that there's usually a foil or some sort of villainous character in rom-coms, chick flicks, and just comedies in general, but this villain felt so much more substantial in the sense that I really felt like I knew the inner mechanisms of this character to a degree that I usually don't for the villains of stories in those genres. Maybe it's also because this film feels like a bunch of New York theater kids acting at an 11 out of 10, but it's important to emphasize how strong these performances were because I tend to nitpick films when the visual style is lacking because I happen to love maximalist art. But the acting was so strong that it was able to compensate to a heavier degree. Like when you go to see a play, it looks like a play because it's a play, and it's not going to be as visually immersive as a film is. But overall, it worked for me. I am going to be moving into the spoilers section after this, but the final recommendation I would make is that you should watch Your Monster a second time for reasons that I will not elaborate on until now when we are going into the spoilers section.
I can't do it. I need time for me.
I could threaten to eat him if that would help. I mean, I could eat him. It would literally take me like 2 seconds.
Now I have to talk about spoilers, and I'm going to speak about plot spoilers in far more detail than I usually do for these opening weekend film reviews, simply because of what the story is. It necessitates it from me. So if you haven't already seen the film, I'm sorry, but I'm going to just jump into this because the ending of Your Monster made me completely reevaluate everything I had just seen, and I had to rewatch my screener a second time just to see if what I thought the ending meant was in fact what it was saying, and it very thoroughly affirmed my takeaway from experiencing the film's ending for the first time, which is Monster doesn't exist. Monster is merely a physical rendering of what's going on internally with Laura, both within the story we're watching, but also what she has experienced in her childhood. If you follow me on Letterboxd, you might have seen me log Your Monster with the review Inception, but for the musical theater kids. And that's because the ending sparks discussions, and also in general, Your Monster is far more cerebral than you might have originally thought when you sat down to watch it for the first time, thinking you were going to be watching just a cute little spooky rom-com, but no, we are going to be doing a deep dive into Laura Franco and watching her downward descent into madness, or perhaps it's her grand awakening into her feminine rage era. Which of those two is the story presenting? Well, that probably depends on your perspective and also how you end up analyzing the material. So in order for me to explain this, we are going to need to go on a full journey. So Come along as we unpack this. Meet Laura Franco. She just got dumped by her boyfriend Jacob when she was having her cancer treatments because Jacob is a piece of garbage stuck to the bottom of your shoe. Once Laura is discharged, she returns to her childhood home because she has nowhere else to go. Her mother isn't there and she doesn't have much in the way of friends or family as far as we can tell, except for her friend Maisie, who picked her up from the hospital and brought her home. Laura is not doing well post-surgery and post-breakup, not only physically from recovering from whatever surgery she had, and they never really specify what type of cancer she was dealing with, but it's not really relevant to the story. Laura can't stop crying, she's wallowing, she's mass ordering tissues from Amazon, and binge eating pies that her mother had sent for her. Maisie informs Laura that auditions are happening for a show Jacob wrote with Laura's help. He had also written this lead character for Laura specifically. The lead character is called Lori. Laura also played this character for the show's various workshops, so yes, it was meant for her. Anyway, this means Laura goes from bad to worse. She's out here texting her ex and begging him not to take the show away from her. Girl, stand up. All this time, Laura has been hearing rumblings in her New York City home, and finally she goes upstairs to figure out what these strange sounds are coming from, and this is when she discovers a monster in her closet, and she's understandably terrified and proceeds to pass out.
What's up?
When she wakes up, Monster seems to know her already. From his perspective, he remembers having met her multiple times, but she doesn't seem to remember him. Now, this is a story about feminine rage, and I think Monster is merely a part of Laura as opposed to his own individual character. And even in the film's promotional press, you've got Tommy Dewey more or less revealing that exact point.
The movie is basically about coming out of that rut and getting in touch with your rage. And I feel like for me as a woman who has been conditioned by society, as many of us, to like be silent and to be polite and to not, ruffle any feathers, this is an important message to get to women out there. And I think I just saw myself when I read the script in her, and I knew that lots of women would see themselves in Laura, and that's why I wanted to do it.
I play Monster, sort of the embodiment of that rage.
One of the childhood incidents that Monster remembers is one where Laura was in the closet with a boy named Benji, and Benji pushed her while they were in there and said to her, "You're a real temptress, you know that?" So if Monster attacked Benji for this misogynistic outburst, but Monster is actually Laura, Laura doesn't remember this encounter until she's reminded of it because Laura has been conditioned by society, as many girls are, to repress the more assertive, confident, or even violent sides of themselves. And when I say violent in this context, I mean it in the sense of self-defense. Laura doesn't remember Monster because she does not have a relationship with that part of herself yet. And she doesn't initially remember what happened with that boy Benji because it was a traumatic experience. What does Monster tell Laura after they first meet again as adults? 1, don't get in my way. 2, don't tell me what to do. And 3, don't tell anyone about Monster. What is the subtext of that? Monster represents that more confident, assertive side of Laura that she is not in touch with. And the thing about not telling anyone about Monster's existence, well, that's going back to that whole notion of how Laura doesn't feel like that part of herself can be out in public or something that is known to others. Another interaction between Laura and Monster. Monster wants to eat Laura's takeout. He ends up joining her to watch the musical that she's watching and ends up loving it too. And what is the meaning of that? Monster loves the same things Laura does because they're the same person. When Laura is contemplating showing up to the auditions for Jacob's musical without having been sent an invitation, she is doubting herself and Monster is hyping her up. I'm a mess. No, you're not. I'm a disaster. Because Laura at this point in the story is the epitome of cracking under the weight of both her own traumas as well as the societal pressures placed on women to doubt oneself, to doubt your own abilities, even though she is fully capable of playing this part that she has already played and helped to write in the first place, although she is not receiving any of the credit or financial compensation for that labor. Laura does badly at her audition, and when she comes back home, she's all, I'm probably not that talented anyway. And Monster's all, you know who's super talented? me. Monster says he can sing too, but Laura denies his ability to do so. They talk about Shakespeare, and Laura doubts her ability to perform Shakespeare because she's not classically trained. But Monster says, well, you don't need to be classically trained to do these plays. And he proceeds to perform a bit of Act 3, Scene 2 of Shakespeare's The Comedy of Error. So Laura, through all of these back and forth things we're watching, is having that battle within herself of doubting her own abilities, of struggling to believe in herself. And at this point in the story, the negative self-doubt is more often than not winning. But the more time that these two spend together and develop and nurture this relationship, the more that Laura can move towards building her confidence and believing in her genuine abilities. Jacob calls Laura and offers her the role of being the understudy of Laurie, as well as being part of the ensemble. Laura accepts this offer, even though it's absolutely beneath her to do so, and she's frustrated. So what does Monster do? He encourages her to break plates, and they start throwing food. It's all very playful. Monster is basically pure id in this scene. Fast forward to the Halloween party, and Laura invites Monster to come, but initially he declines the offer. However, eventually when he does show up, he asks Laura if she's having fun, and she says no, because she was having a horrible time. But once Monster shows up, she starts to have fun, which represents learning to have fun by herself and being independent in that way. And to further reiterate my point about how Monster doesn't really exist and how he's just a part of Laura, while Monster is at this party, seemingly in public, and there are loads of other people around, and these two are apparently dancing together on the dance floor, somehow no one really sees him, no one comes up to talk to him, no one acknowledges him in any way. And why is that? Because he's not a real person. Monster asks Laura if she wants to get out of there, and she agrees, but first she says she wants to go to the bathroom first, which is a lie because in actuality she was following Jacob, and she spots him hooking up with whom she believes to be Jackie Denon, the lead actress who was cast to play Laurie, the lead role that Laura should have gotten. And Jackie didn't even have to audition for this part because she already had name recognition, so there you have it, that's show business. Monster tells Laura to stay put, and he goes and causes an accident that injures Jacob, and it's either a break or a strain, but shortly after this he has to wear an arm sling for a while. And there's something very specific in how Laura moves again once Monster returns to her after causing this accident, where the physicality makes it look as if Laura is waking up from a trance. Once you've seen the film and you know this perspective of the story, there's really no other way to watch the film. All the signs are there. Monster and Laura leave the party, and Laura keeps saying it's okay, she's fine, and Monster emphatically points out that no, this is not true. What Jacob did to her was horrific, and Monster scolds Laura for feeling bad about what happened to Jacob, and he reminds her of all the ways that Jacob screwed her over with the musical, promising to give her this part, putting her on Broadway as the lead, and finally Laura breaks down crying and screaming that yeah, it's not okay. And then the two of them kiss, and they go back home and become intimate.
Intimate? Is that how old people say sex?
Afterwards, Laura hears Monster playing the piano, and she says that she didn't know he could play, and he says that he has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. Monster can play piano because Laura can play piano. He can do everything that she can. He can act, he likes the same food as her, the same movies, the same songs. The song he starts playing in this scene, how does Laura respond? Oh, I love this song. Yeah, of course you do, Laura, because Laura is Monster and Monster is Laura. So we get this montage of Laura and Monster hanging out together. They're falling in love with one another, but really, because Monster is Laura, this simply means that Laura is growing stronger and more self-assured. She can stand up for herself, and we see a further indication of this when she goes to get some blood taken as part of her post-op protocol or procedure, I suppose. And the nurse says to her, oh, you have difficult veins. And Laura responds, I have a difficult nurse. Now, being rude to a nurse, not necessarily the most ideal behavior, but my impression is that this encounter exists solely to convey how Laura is changing as she develops this relationship with Monster, but it's also a foreshadowing tool for what comes next, which happens to be one of my favorite things that Laura does in this entire film. It's one of the most fun things to watch as a fan of Melissa, because Jacob starts being really demanding and snarky and rude to Jackie, the lead actress, when he's not happy with her performance during rehearsals, and Laura proceeds to snap at Jacob, and when Jacob is rude in response, Laura just completely explodes on him. She rips this man a new one, and it's in front of everyone, and it is glorious to watch. She makes a scene, and honey, I was seated with a bowl of popcorn that was as big as my head. It's a scene that will inevitably be clipped and looped and used among all the girls anytime we feel as though we've had enough. Maisie, Laura's friend, tries to intervene in this fight, but there's simply no stopping Laura at this point. The two of them end up getting into a bit of a tiff after rehearsal because Laura calls her a bad friend, and then Maisie says to call her when she's herself again, and Laura insists, no, this is real, this is me, I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. Jacob pulls Laura aside about her behavior. They're in his office, and Laura proceeds to break down about how Jacob hurt her, about how he took away this role and the promise that he made to her of putting her on Broadway, and she's just so overcome with emotion. She admits that she still loves him. Laura, girl, stand up. And then they hook up. And after that, Jacob tells her that she's out of the show.
I see you, Milan! I see you!
When Laura gets home after this, she's looking for Monster because the two of them had plans to get together and have dinner, but she came home late because she had stayed behind with Jacob, hooking up with him. Girl, that is one of the most diabolical relapses in self-respect I've seen in a while, but it's okay because we're going to get through this. Laura finds Monster in her closet, but there's this whole hidden room that she's never seen before in there. It's full of trinkets and mementos from all throughout her childhood and life, toys, lost socks, things like that. Now, Monster can tell that something's off with Laura, and when she finally admits to having slept with Jacob, Monster is mad, but his reaction isn't a "you cheated on me and I'm upset because I'm your boyfriend" type of reaction. It's more of an "I'm disappointed in you because you deserve better than this" type of reaction. And if Monster was a real character, the first version would make more sense, but he's not real. He's a part of Laura. He's the embodiment of her rage, her confidence, self-respect, and that's why his reaction is the second version. Monster is telling her that Jacob doesn't love her the way that she deserves to be loved, and they have this massive fight where you can see how bad of a state she's in. And while these two are arguing, there's a point where they're facing one another, and Monster is yelling at Laura, "Look at yourself, Laura." And Laura yells back directly to his face, "I am looking at myself." Yeah, because she's looking at Monster, and Monster is actually Laura. Ooh, you see what I mean? Everything in this film is so intentionally designed and executed that there is simply no other way for me to see this story. Laura shuts Monster up into the closet, and we get this back and forth of Laura doing this exact thing as a child, which to me represents how younger Laura got scared at her own actions when she lashed out at this boy who had harmed her in the closet. And why was she scared? Because the world does not validate feminine rage. But do you know who does? Me! And that's why I'm giving this film a positive review. When Laura calms down, she opens the closet to apologize to Monster, but Monster has disappeared. And that secret room of his has also disappeared. The closet is just a regular closet because that's what happens when you don't nurture the relationship you have with yourself. Self-confidence, self-belief, self-love. If you struggle with these things, you have to put in work to get them back up and running again. Sometime later, Laura goes outside and she sees Jackie, who is there to thank Laura for sticking up for her during the rehearsal. And Jackie also wants to apologize because she didn't actually know that Jacob and Laura had previously been a romantic couple and that the part had been written for Laura specifically. Jackie fully condemns Jacob for his behavior, as well as how he's treated Laura, and we love that. We love Jackie because Jackie is a girl's girl. Laura mentions the hooking up incident from Halloween, and Jackie says that she has never hooked up with Jacob. So Laura is taken aback because that begs the question of who did she walk in on him hooking up with at the Halloween party? But Jackie, being the girl's girl that she is, proposes that Laura swap with her and perform the lead role in the show on opening night. So Laura sneaks in, and on her way to the dressing room, what does she spot down a dark corridor? Jacob hooking up with Maisie, her friend Maisie, who brought her home from the hospital. I didn't mention this plot point until now because I wanted to focus on the many details of how the story is designed to show that Monster is actually Laura. But when you go back and rewatch your Monster with the knowledge that Maisie was the other woman the whole time, ooh, it is diabolical. So Maisie comes in all frantic and apologetic, and you know what? It's too late to apologize, Maisie. Laura orders her to leave the dressing room because now it's showtime. Jacob is shocked to see Laura on stage, but she's doing the job. Fast forward to intermission, and Jacob comes backstage huffing and puffing. He's yelling at Laura. He's yelling at everyone to go away and they are left alone to hash it out on stage, albeit behind some curtains. Now, when Laura heard Jacob approaching, she grabbed the yardstick from the table on stage and she snapped it in half. Oh, now that's interesting. Something's coming, and I don't know what it is, but it is gonna be great. Jacob throws a tantrum, and we don't need to rehash every detail of what he says because we've already established at this point that he's the worst. And Laura gives him a warning, which is more than he deserves. Watch what you say to me. And Jacob gets all, or what? And Laura responds, I'll rip your throat out. And I was ready. I was just ready to see all of it. Bring it on. But then we cut to the curtain rising and Laura is singing the song that she's been singing for this entire film. And while doing so, we can see that she's now covered in blood. Huh. That's interesting. So while the song is going on, we see a few things. We see her having a vision of Monster returning and slashing Jacob's throat, and Laura dances with Monster, and she's very emotionally overcome at being reunited with him. But we also see the camera pan to reveal that Jacob is lying dead on the ground in a pool of his own blood while Laura is performing this number.
It's my favorite movie of all time.
Yeah, me too.
Monster had asked Laura after clawing the throat, did I take that too far? And I responded, no! And much of the audience seems confused by what's happening on stage, but Melissa was performing the hell out of this number. Now, I've repeatedly drilled this point about how Monster is actually Laura, so Laura was the one who served Jacob a bit of karma on that stage. But this is when we circle back to my comparison of Your Monster to Inception, where the material is more cerebral, or at least it lends itself to that type of deeper analysis and interpretation. I think there's room for people to debate on whether this last bit of what Laura does to Jacob is meant to be a literal thing that happens or something that's meant to be more artistically presented and interpreted. Because if you take this story and you believe that it's supposed to be an uplifting story, one where Laura gets something resembling a happy ending, if you see her attacking Jacob as something very literal, Laura is not going to get to fulfill her dream of having this successful Broadway career. She's going to end up tossed into the cogs of the US prison industrial complex. If you look at her lashing out at Jacob as something more internal but being presented externally, the same way that Monster is not a real person but merely a part of Laura presented externally as a character, then you could interpret this as Laura's unresolved romantic feelings for Jacob dying. She has reconciled with Monster, who represents her self-belief, self-confidence, her rage, which would mean that she can now kill those feelings she's been clinging on to, feelings for Jacob. And the portion of the audience that is reacting with horror, that could simply be symbolic of how society as a whole has this nasty tendency to disavow women who are self-assured and no nonsense, women who refuse to be degraded by narcissistic men. Now, I'm more inclined to interpret the film in this more artistic, cerebral, abstract way, simply because I enjoy the story less if everything she went through and overcame culminated in her ending up in the US prison system. Absolutely not. In my fantasy, Melissa, or Laura Franco, they are free and thriving and serving entertainment and inspiration to the masses. So yes, Your Monster was definitely not what I expected and definitely not something I would classify as a rom-com. How could I when Monster is not even a real character? But it is a love story, and more specifically, it's a story of self-love. And I had a really fun time with that. So hopefully, if you've made it this far, you have already watched Your Monster, but if you decided to go ahead and spoil yourself before seeing it, still go and support Melissa because she has more than earned that support with her hard work, her skills, and her humanity.
Are you asking me out on a date?
No.
Well, I'm not gonna leave the house.
Fine.
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 Fine.